All right, let's dive into one of the core puzzles from Karl Marx's Capital. It's all about how profits can keep going up, even when you can't make the workday any longer. The answer he came up with is something called relative surplus value. And honestly, it's a pretty ingenious concept once you break it down. So, put yourself in the shoes of a factory owner for a second. You've already pushed the workday to its absolute legal and physical limit, let's say 12 hours. You literally cannot add another minute. So, where do you find more profit? This is the central question. And the answer is way more subtle than just making people work longer or harder. To really crack this puzzle, we first have to understand how Marx looked at the workday. For him, it wasn't just one solid block of time. Nope, he saw it as being split into two very distinct, very different parts. Okay, so here's that breakdown. The first part of the day is what he called necessary labor. You can think of this as the time the worker puts in just to cover their own paycheck. But everything after that, that's surplus labor. And every single minute in that part of the day is creating pure profit for the owner. Let's put some numbers on this to make it super clear. Imagine a 12-hour workday. If it takes 10 hours for a worker to produce enough value to earn their wages, that leaves 2 hours of surplus labor. That little 2-hour slice at the end of the day, that's where all the profit comes from. Now, the most obvious way to get more profit is just to extend the workday, right? Turn that 12-hour day into a 13 or 14-hour day. The text calls this absolute surplus value. But like we said, that's often not possible. There are limits. So if you can't make the day longer, what's left? Well, you have to change the proportions of the day itself. And this is where things start to get really clever. Okay, check this out. The total workday is still locked at 12 hours. But what if? What if you could shrink that necessary labor time from 10 hours down to just 9? Well, that extra hour has to go somewhere. It automatically gets added to the surplus labor time, which jumps from 2 hours to 3. That's a 50% increase in profit without adding a single second to the workday. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Just cut their wages, that's easy. But for the sake of this analysis, that's off the table. We're working under the assumption that labor, or what Marx called labor power, is a commodity that's being sold at its actual fair value. So we need a more fundamental solution than just underpaying people. And this gets us right to the heart of it. If you can't just cheat the worker out of their wages, how do you genuinely reduce the amount of time they need to work to earn their living? The answer isn't some accounting trick. It's found in the production process itself. You see, the solution has nothing to do with manipulating the clock. It's all about revolutionizing the work itself. It's all about productivity. Let's follow the logic here, kind of like dominoes. The ultimate goal, at the top, is to increase surplus labor time. To do that, you have to shorten necessary labor time. How? You have to lower the value of what it costs to keep a worker going. And the only way to do that is to make the things workers need to live, their food, their clothes, cheaper to produce. And how do you do that? You have to increase labor productivity. See, it all starts at the bottom with productivity. And that is our key concept for today, relative surplus value. It's the profit that's generated not by making the day longer, but by this clever redivision of the day, all driven by productivity making the cost of living and therefore the cost of labor cheaper. But here's a crucial detail. Not all productivity gains are created equal. If you get way more efficient at building, say, luxury yachts, that doesn't really help lower the cost of labor for the average person. It's only when you make the necessities cheaper, the food, the clothing, or even the raw materials for those things, that you can actually shorten that necessary labor time for the whole system. But here's the twist. This massive system-wide effect isn't what any single capitalist is trying to do. They're not thinking about the whole system. They're just trying to get a leg up on their competition. It all starts with one person's individual advantage. Let's look at this example. Say the average company in an industry makes 12 items a day. The market price for each one, what the text calls the social value, is 1 shilling. But then an innovator comes along. They've got a new machine, a new process, and they can crank out 24 items in that same 12-hour day. For them, the actual labor cost, their individual value, is now just 9 pence per item. And this is the innovator's secret weapon. They can still sell their product for the going market rate of 1 shilling, but it only costs them 9 pence to make. That 3 pence difference, that's their extra profit. It's a special reward just for them, for being the first to innovate. They get to pocket the difference between their lower private cost and the higher social cost. And look at the insane result for that innovator. Because their workers are suddenly twice as productive, the time they need to work to cover their wages, the necessary labor, plummets from 10 hours down to just 7.5. This means their surplus labor time explodes from 2 hours a day to 4.5 hours a day. That is a huge immediate win. But, of course, an advantage that's sweet can't last forever. The innovator's success immediately kicks off a chain reaction that ripples through the entire industry. You can see the whole life cycle here. First, our innovator enjoys that extra profit. Then, to grab more market share, they start to lower their prices. This puts immense pressure on everyone else, forcing them to adopt the new, more productive method just to stay in business. And finally, the innovation becomes the new normal, the new average, and that special, extra profit disappears for everyone. So, when all the dust settles, what's the final outcome? Well, the innovator's personal advantage is gone, but the product they make is now permanently cheaper for everyone. And here's the key. If that product is a necessity, like bread or shirts, the value of every worker's labor power falls across the entire system. The end result is that the whole capitalist class benefits from a higher general rate of surplus value. This whole process leads us to a final, really fascinating paradox that sits right at the heart of the system. Way back in the 18th century, an economist named Quesnay basically posed this riddle. If the whole point of making things is to create wealth by making products more valuable, why is every single capitalist trying their hardest to make their own products cheaper? It seems like a total contradiction. And here is the solution to that riddle. A capitalist doesn't ultimately care about the value of the individual product they sell. They care about the profit, the surplus value that's hidden inside it. The paradox disappears when you realize that the very same process, boosting productivity, that makes each item cheaper is also the process that increases the amount of surplus value they can extract from the worker's day. And this leaves us with one last, very provocative question to chew on. All of this innovation means the actual amount of labor needed to make any given product gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So why then doesn't the worker's workday get shorter too? That is a question we're thinking about.